Welcome back, Honors. All right, man, y'all are crushing it the last couple of days. It is ridiculous. I think y'all are going to kill this next test, but let's not dawdle. Let's get after it. Let's keep talking about our boy, Napoleon. Now, anyway, so we've been talking a lot about how, he's progressive, yet conservative. He's an absolutist, but he's a liberator, right? He's a very, very convoluted figure. And as we know, he's going to be in power from about 1799 to about 1812. Those are the specific dates of the Napoleonic phase of, the Napoleonic phase of the revolution, right? So, as we know, he got his early starts being born in Corsica, and then he proved himself to the military at the Siege of Toulon and several other places like that. Could never quite defeat Admiral Horatio Nelson. We talked about how that guy died today. Which is absolutely gruesome. Anyway, talked about several other things. His invasion of Egypt, his biggest accomplishments, promoting people based on merit, and the lyces, and the blah, 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 blah. And then, the Napoleonic Code being one of the most important ones of his accomplishments, talking about how it was very liberal and progressive, but then at the same time, very conservative and outdated. We talked about his grand empire, and then we started talking about his three biggest mistakes. And today we talked about the continental system in class, which was grand plan, terrible execution. And then we talked about the Peninsular War, which turned into an guerrilla warfare that ended up destroying him in that region. But it ended up also giving the United States the Louisiana Territory, which is amazing. But going into it, now we've got the invasion of Russia in 1812, right? So the invasion of Russia in 1812 was one of his probably brightest shining star of his biggest mistakes, right? So Napoleon is going to invade Russia for violating the continental system, right? So Russia started trading with Great Britain when they weren't supposed to. As we know, the continental system was the big system set in place to prevent anyone from trading with Great Britain, hopefully to... One second. Sorry, I got to make a to-do list for myself or I'll never remember what to do, right? So the continental system is a economic blockade system to try and prevent Russia from being able to actually trade with anyone outside of the continental scape of Europe. And then that way they were hoping that if we cut Britain off from trading with everybody, then we should be able to kind of kill them forcibly through their wallet. Well, the problem was the naval blockade was much too large, and after, of course, Napoleon loses most of his naval force at the Battle of Trafalgar to Admiral Horatio Nelson, yet again, this is going to take a massive step down, right? And he's going to really, really struggle to actually implement this whole process. Now, Napoleon is going to go invade Russia for violating this continental system, right? Now, the Russians realize that they're wildly outmatched. The Russian military was only about 100 to 150,000 next to the Grand Army of Napoleon, which was at 600,000, right? Taken from all over the Grand Empire, from all over the continent of Europe, and shoved into this new big amalgamous military that he made for himself, right? So you had German-speaking troops, and you had French-speaking troops, and you had Spanish-speaking troops, and there were 600,000 of them, right? This seems like an obvious dub for Napoleon, right? 6-1. 6-1. That's an insane outnumbering, right? Also, the Russian military was poorly equipped, and not to mention the fact that they hadn't had the best harvests in the last few hundred years, mainly just because, again, the lice age, big problem. Now, anyway, but the Russians are smart, all right? So, das Vidanya, Napoleon, right? Never, ever, if history has taught us anything, never invade Russia in the fall, all right? So, now, because ironically enough, it will cause your fall. Now, anyway, as Russian troops engaged the French military in some of the earliest battles, they would then retreat. And as they retreat, they used a policy known as scorched earth policy, right? Now, the way this scorched earth policy works is that as they retreated, they would burn everything the French could use to the ground, right? So in old school military tactics, and even in modern day military tactics in a lot of ways, as you progress into a country and you push in, you shouldn't have to resupply foodstuffs and other main little small secondary resources because you can get them from your enemy as you push further into their country. You can ransack farms, you can go in and actually take livestock and food and stuff like that, so you'll be fine. But Russia is massive. And as the Russians would retreat, they'd burn the farms to the ground. They'd burn their fields to the ground. They would destroy everything, hence scorched earth. And Napoleon's going to make it all the way into Moscow, which is wild, right? The biggest city in all of Russia. But when he gets there, it's abandoned, right? The Russians have all retreated and started heading towards St. Petersburg, right? He never received a surrender from the Russian Tsar, and here comes Russian winter.
I'm so cold that I can use my nose drippings as a pair of chopsticks.
I'm so cold that I'm shivering.
Right? What did I say? You never invade during the fall, right? These military campaigns take quite a bit of time, okay? So he starts invading during the fall, and then Russian winter shows up, and Napoleon has to retreat through the Russian winter, right? So he has to make his way all the way back to France through the Russian winter, and 590,000 of his 600,000 troops either starved or froze to death. Let me give you that number one more time. 590,000. Let's talk about the percentages of that really, really quick, just to give you some extra, study material and things like that. So we got 590, divided by 600. That's 98%. 98% of his troops dead from freezing to death or starving. That is insane. Now, a lot of them also died in battle as well. I'm lumping those guys in. But that's wild, right? There are some historians that believe that a lot of this might have been due to the freezing to death, might have been due to actually also a wardrobe malfunction, right? So during this time period, Napoleon was the first one to start experimenting with the use of canned goods in tin cans, right? And since they had so much tin left over, T-I-N, tin, right? S-N on the elemental chart for my chemistry nerds, he started having the buttons for French winter jackets made out of tin, right? Since they had so much of it left over. The thing about tin is when it gets below a certain degree point, it starts becoming extremely brittle and it snaps. And so a lot of the French soldiers, the buttons on their jackets began disintegrating and snapping apart. And so they would have to clutch themselves like this the whole time, expending energy to keep their clothing on, leading to a lot of them freezing to death, right? So that's absolutely insane. So when Napoleon makes it all the way back, his forces were destroyed, and his enemies saw this as a time to jump, right? Napoleon is defeated by a combined British, Russian, and Prussian coalition, and his army is in shambles. When this happens, he is going to be arrested and taken captive by the British, and he's going to be banished to a tiny island called Elba in the Mediterranean Sea in 1815, right? So, hold on. That number might not actually be completely accurate. Give me 1 second. Napoleon banished to Elba. Now, yeah, see, that was 1814 is right about where he was defeated, and he was banished officially in February of 1815, right? So 1815, underline that, star it, highlight it. It might be the most important year in all of European history. I know some of y'all are like, what about the Magna Carta? Thank you. And I know some of y'all are like, the Norman invasion of England's super important. I agree with you. But 1815 is wild because you're about to go from this back to the regular map of Europe, right? Napoleon destroyed everything. He destroyed the Holy Roman Empire and turned it into the Confederation of the Rhine, right? He destroyed parts of the Austrian Empire and wildly shrank them. He took over Spain and sold a third of their territory to the Americans, right? This is insane. And as he did this, he progressed liberal ideas of codified law, men being equal under the rights of law, but then he also took women and children a huge step back. So Napoleon is a massive figure, and his banishment in 1815 is going to be wildly important, okay? Oh, look at him. I need this poster so badly. Anyway, now, so Napoleon his 100 days, or Bussy, if you want to, like, give me a big version, whatever. Yeah. All right, so now, after a year on Elba, for about a year, Napoleon is just sitting there brooding, right? Because here's the problem. Europe, you should have looked at a map just once before you did this. Because let's look at the island of Elba. You just banished Napoleon to a small island off the coast of Italy, which ironically enough is closer to France than his home island of Corsica is, right? You banished him to an island directly off the coast of Italy, home to a giant group of people he's taken over already, and he is within a short boat ride back to France, right? How stupid could you be, right? So, and he is under the guard of the British, and somehow, one night, to this day, no one truly knows exactly how he did it, but he had been communicating with his old generals back in France, right? And he gets back to France, raises a small army, and creates his 100 Days campaign. Napoleon returned for 100 straight days and amassed a 70,000 strong, gigantic military, right? He once again becomes Emperor of France in his 100 days, and he attempts to regain and strengthen his army, right? Builds it back up to about 70,000. The French, a lot of them welcomed his return, right? To try and finally finish this whole problem, Napoleon has a dramatic downfall. And he gets finished off by a combined force of British and Prussians and the Duke of freaking Wellington. All right, so the Duke of he has to ruin everything. The Duke of Wellington, Admiral Horatio's new version, all right, Admiral Horatio Nelson's new version. Napoleon could never beat Nelson or the Duke of Wellington, right? But they meet them at a small Belgian town called Waterloo. And outside of it, there are these giant fields, right? And Napoleon meets a combined British and Prussian coalition force at the Battle of Waterloo, and his inexperienced army is defeated. Napoleon also made some drastic mistakes, all right? Let's not let him off the hook completely. Napoleon is an amazing military strategist, but this time it kicked him in the butt, right? He tried to wait for a giant field that he wanted to charge over top of with his cavalry to dry up so it would actually be easier for the horses to move through it. But in that moment, while he's waiting for the field to dry up, the Prussians attacked him on his left flank and surprised him, and it caused mass hysteria amongst his troops, and it caused his lines to be split, isolated, pincered, and defeated, right? So Napoleon and his inexperienced army are going to be tragically defeated at the Battle of Waterloo by his own mistakes, right? And this time, he was going to be exiled for good in St. Helena on an island in the South Atlantic off the coast of Africa, right? So this time, they banished him so far away that he could never actually get back, right? And Napoleon would die on St. Helena off the coast of Africa after about 6 years.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
From what we believe to be stomach cancer. There's a conspiracy theory, a lot of conspiracy theories about his death, right? A lot of people think that the British might have poisoned him. A lot of people think that there's a chance that actually some other agents wanted to see him dead, right? But he died. He had a lot of really famous quotes during this time period where he would actually say, like, one of his most famous quotes was, "To die is nothing, but to live defeated and without glory is to die every day," right? So he actually really struggled with this exile up until his death, and he was confined to doing only two of his favorite things: reading the newspaper to understand what's going on in Europe, and gardening, which is one of his favorite hobbies. Me too. But going all the way back to the beginning of his rule, he's a super cataclysmic figure because he spread liberal and progressive ideas all over Europe. And he borderline showed the weakness of these absolute monarchies, led to future revolutions, and is considered a very progressive man, but he's also extremely conservative because he tried to reinstitute slavery. He tried to take women's rights back a step. He tried to basically strip any rights that women had earned during the revolution and also the rights of children, right? He was considered revolutionary because he believed in democratic elections, plebiscites, and actually people having a voice. But he's also anti-revolutionary because he made himself an absolutist, right? Is he a child of the Enlightenment? Or is he just an old absolutist, right? Because he did say this right before he became Emperor of France. He said, "I found the crown of France in the gutter, so I picked it up." And on that note, that's Napoleon. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. I hope you all have a fantastic evening. Have a good one.